Hello, my name is Ceres. I have been a horror narrator for the past 2 years. My New Year's resolution is to create more horror for my YouTube channel. The author's name is Cryptic and the story is titled Because I Love You. Though only a couple centuries had passed, it felt like a lifetime ago. I was only 8 when my mother took me away from my home in Ireland. My father worked hard at the docks unloading fish throughout the day, always stinking of it. My mother, being a conservative woman, rarely complained. I think it may have been an offense to her deep down, a wound that festered over the years, finally bubbling to the surface, making itself known in all its fetid glory. My father was the same, holding in all his emotion until they boiled over. I would probably be lying if I said I didn't deserve it, but I was foolish enough to cross his path while he was deep in the jug. I would usually end up with a pretty good shiner. As I stated, it wasn't me who set the wheels in motion, I swear, my mother, goading that man on purpose. And the beatings on her was as regular as you like. Her usual complaint would be his drinking. I didn't see anything wrong with it myself as a boy. And over the years, I could see the desire to escape the troubles of life. If for a while, I can't remember it so well anymore, but I do recall the wooden jug exploding against the wall, having just missed my mother's head. She had been going off on him as soon as he came through the door about wasting good coin on the poison. I used to get so angry, yelling at her in my head, as to why she would be stupid enough to instigate him. That night was different, however. The night he beat her every color but flesh. I just sat myself in the kitchen corner, praying to God and all the saints listening, that it would end soon. After a bit, it did. I worked up enough courage to tiptoe to my bedroom, making my way carefully around the broken furniture. My poor mother was a sight, having crawling her bloody mess of a self under the table. I had almost made it, too, until I stumbled over a busted stool. He turned his head, and I swear the fires of hell in them eyes. I can't recall what he said, but in seconds he was on top of me, smacking me around. I begged him to stop and cried so loud I didn't even hear the fire poker knock him in the head. I just remember that it did stop, and a great weight fell on top of me, threatening to push the very life out of my lungs. I looked up, and my mother's bloodied and swollen all over, pushed him off without so much as a cloth nor coin we left. It was a miserable time after that. The weather was late fall, and friends were scarce. We made it halfway across the country to a town of Galloway. It wasn't nearly as big in those days, however, it was plenty big for what I was used to. We made our home in a small shelter that was neither warm nor clean. I was no more than a street urchin, and my mother was now a whore. I didn't see her much. She spent most of her time in a warm bedroom with plenty of men. It made me hate her even more. And soon snow covered the town. It was rare to see my mother, and never during the day. She would come by and bring me crusts of bread and cold broth. I ate. It was nothing like the hot stew we would have in our childhood home. It seemed I was always hungry. I didn't bathe, and when the itch of my wool coat was compounded with the bites of lice and other little bugs, I began to cough. Just an irritation at first, and of course, I had been sick before, but it turned into something much worse. Day by day, I could feel my windpipe tightening. I tried to cough up the swollen skin, but only blood would produce. I slept a lot more, as it would preferable to the agony of unconsciousness, but even then, I could still feel the choking metallic heat that burned inside me. I fell asleep once more, and I dreamed of my aunt and uncle and even relatives that long since passed, and even met a brother I didn't know I had. That was the last time I would ever know of such peace and happiness. All at once, I felt myself being yanked back hard, like someone pulling me by the scruff of the neck. There was a great gasp as my eyes shut open, and the pain in my body was incredible. The closest I can describe it is the feeling of all my muscles, joints, tendons cramping together in one great squeeze, strangling, gurgling, escaping my throat. Though my internal screams were much louder, I felt the muscles in my chest give one final thump, and then nothing. The muscles in my body released as much the same rate as the heat from inside me. I opened my eyes, and everything was as sharp as a bell. In fact, all the pain from my sickness was gone. I could smell and hear things I had no business smelling and hearing, and I found I was incredibly thirsty. My mother was lying next to me, and her smile went wide, showing teeth that were entirely too sharp. In fact, I felt my own, and they were now indeed long and serrated. I opened my mouth to speak, and the first time in weeks, I assume, and told her I needed water. She quickly got up and ran over to the sack on the floor. I sat up and, to my horror, saw that it was moving. She carried it back over and reached in. My uneasiness quickly stopped when the scent of something hot filled my nose. My thought of water vanished as she pulled out a large rat out of the sack. Without even so much as a beat of hesitation, I launched myself at it. My hands squeezed the animal tightly, popping bones as the creature struggled, and I sank my teeth into it. The blood was more filled than any food I'd ever known, and I drank it completely as my mother held me in her lap, gently rocking me. This went on for a year, and it gave me time to ponder my existence. I was disgusted, especially with the fact that I had to stick only to animals as my mother instructed. What she did to me was unforgivable, and my hatred for her grew to new heights. After so long of feeding on vermin and farm animals, the smell of living humans were growing overpowering. I finally said, hell with it. It was the stupid cow's fault. I lived in such a cursed life anyways. I waited until the eventide came upon the land. My mother still hadn't risen yet, and wouldn't for a while longer. I stalked the country road as a heavy fog rolled in, threatening a large storm nearby. And indeed, the sound of thunder weren't far off in the distance. A wagon came towards the direction of town, announcing itself with little endeavor to be silent. When I was sure there was no one else nearby, I leapt for the driver. The horses whinnying, and the wagon crashed to a stop. Before the man knew what had happened, half of his blood was down my throat. Oh, the taste! The feeling of raw power I felt strengthened that I had never before knew existed and wanted more. My desire met thrill screams coming from the inside of the cab, and I ripped the door off. In my euphoric state, the screams reached a new height as I drained the woman of their delicious life. It was spicy and rich, and I had the ability. I would surely have wept. I was too inebriated at the time to truly know what I had done. As the feelings of absolute bliss subsided, I looked down to see the mother and two young daughters I had just murdered. That was horribly enough. However, my antipathy, I saw the small shape underneath a slightly red-stained blanket, motionless. I cried out to the night in anguish. What have I done? I knelt to the ground screaming, and for too long. A small company of men that rode in on horseback from Galloway came upon me. They saw the mess of the carnage and chase had begun. As impressive as my new speed was, the horses gained quickly. I ran into the empty, fog-filled streets, and my mother grabbed holding of me. We raced to the graveyard that had served as our home. I began to feel safe, but I was a fool. There was no place to hide, and little time. My mother pulled me over to a small tomb, pushing the heavy slab over and hurrying me inside. As an age of decay overtook me and the bones rattled beneath my form, I would have resisted that I had known what was coming, but in the jumble of confusion, I was just watching my mother whisper, "I love you," and she pulled the lid back over. It was hard to hear, even with the heightened sense. However, I could make out my mother's screams. They were relentless, and after that, nothing. 200 years or so have gone by. I lost track. I write novels to pass the time, but none a night goes by that I don't regret the way I squandered my time with my mother. I am somehow ever thankful for all that she sacrificed for me, for all the times I had to ask why. The answers is always the same. I do my best to feed upon animals that I do slip from time to time. The only thing that keeps me on track is a letter she slipped with me the horrible night. My dearest Brahm, I fear this day would eventually come, so I want to have some sort of closure. Should you ever lose me, I know you hate me for all the things you had to go through in life, and if I could change them all, I would. You were the only important thing in my life. I couldn't stand by and watch your father abuse you. I gladly sold my body in return for a safe place for you to stay, as I have nothing else to offer for coin. When I saw you grow sick and almost die, I had a friend turn you into something else. It was heartbreaking for me to do. However, I couldn't lose you. I changed myself so you wouldn't have to be alone. I always knew your anguish of having to feed on animals, but I didn't want you to have to hurt another soul. I can't say how it will end, but just know that I will always be there for you in any way possible. If you ever have to ask why, just know that it's because I love you. Please forgive me, my son. Love always, your mom, Charlotte Matilda.